I just want to thank you all for coming today and joining us. We're really happy to have students and faculty joining us, and it's fun to catch up. I feel like we usually connect with students and faculty a little bit more in person, and this year has just been kind of a weird year for everyone. So I'm glad that we can all get together. I'm Frances Hayes, the Interim Director of Communications and Public Relations here at the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute. And I'll be leading you through the workshop today. But first, I'd like to introduce our Executive Director of the Institute, Peter McCormick. He's going to tell you a little bit more about how your work relates to our mission at the Institute. So go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Frances. Thank you all for participating today. At DWFI, hold on a sec, let me pull up my notes. At DWFI, or the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute, our vision is for a food and water secure world. It's very ambitious, and every year, one of the things we do, we support research through our student support program, working on different projects, different aspects of what we see as the challenge of water and food security. And given that it's such a broad topic, there are many complexities. I think this is one of the exciting pieces of our program, or particularly exciting pieces, because we get to work with different disciplines and different folks looking at different elements of the challenge. But ultimately, what we're looking for is how do we produce more food or develop more food security with less pressure on our water resources. And that, at a global level, that's relatively easy to say. At a local level, it's tough to do and difficult to move forward. This is really one of our more significant investments, and for the reasons I've just alluded to. And what in our mission, we're charged with having impact. So we're really looking at how can we translate this onto measurable change on the ground. We don't anticipate that in any one project. It's more a direction overall with our program, and how do we help direct your work and our work to achieve that impact. Basically, we very much depend on the research and work you do and the progress you're making towards this very ambitious goal. And ultimately, what we would like to see is that some of you at least continue in this, either in food security or water security, and become leaders in your own right in the science or the practice of relevant to what the topics we're discussing. We have invested nearly $3 million since 2014 into this program, with over 80 awards, and we cover postdoctorates, graduate students, and a few undergraduate students across the University of Nebraska system. Most of these dollars have been matched by the faculty leaders themselves, so it's very much leveraging and helping get impact for our investments. But it's also been greatly expanded by the energy and efforts of students like yourselves. I just want to reinforce how much we value your contribution to our ambitious goal. I'm really myself very intrigued by the fact that we engage with so many different disciplines, and we do, in part of trying to bring our program together, is how we can get those disciplines to also appreciate the different dimensions of what we're working on. Again, thank you all. And now I'd like to hand this over to our Assistant Director, Rachel Herpel.
Good morning. I say that because normally I'm much better after 10. So I'm just hitting my mark. So, but welcome everybody, and I'm very happy to see everyone, because like Frances has pointed out, I know you all very well by your CVs and on paper, and so it's really good to see everyone in person this year. So that being said, I'm here to just make a note that this workshop and in the spring is all these events are heading toward kind of some significant other events that are coming up. And so this workshop is first in line to another event we have, is the Research Forum coming up April 6th, right? Is the next event. And then for practical purposes, is another way to share your work, and relative to the program is a reporting on May 21st. And that's significant, is that's an opportunity for you to share your work, kind of what you've been working on all throughout the year. And also for some of you, it's also where you are able to ask for another year of support. So I'll be getting in touch with you and having more details about that. But that's kind of the process we go through where you're able to do that. So you'll be hearing from us about the details of that. But basically, you know, tell us about all your activities, your partners, your outcomes, you know, how this year has really impacted you. And so Francis is going to tell you about, you know, really how you communicate your science to people who aren't really, you know, in your subject area, and how you can do that so it's really understandable. But your report, you know, is how you can really do that within your kind of your peers. So you can cover all your bases. So with that, I'll hand it back to Francis.
Thanks, Rachel. So today we're going to discuss the greater purpose of your research and how to communicate that impact. So we're really looking at how we're going to share your work with non-researchers and non-scientists, and how you want your research to influence the future of your field, shape the future of our world, kind of the bigger picture idea of why you're doing what you're doing. And also give you a way to kind of have that elevator pitch, or talk with a potential colleague to come up with a totally different idea. So, you know, where is this idea going to take you from here? So at the end, you'll be ready to explain your bigger vision in a personal research impact statement of about 1 to 3 sentences. I know that will be hard to pare your research down that much, but we're going to aim for that. So I think it's incredibly useful to do this when you're looking for future jobs after graduation, trying to get future funding from people that might not be well-versed in your area, or just presenting your research in general. So hopefully we'll give you some good takeaways today. And this is going to be kind of a workshop feel. So at the end, we might go, if we have time, we'll go through some of your research and maybe lead you through some of this stuff. I think everyone's muted right now, but I'll also have a time for questions too. So the main question is, why are you researching what you're researching? When you first started and you picked this topic, what was it that interested you the most about it? Did you think it was neat? Were you trying to solve a particular problem that you knew of? Were you inspired by somebody else's work? Did you have a certain vision for how you might use this knowledge after you were done studying it? So I'm not a scientist or a researcher. I'm a communicator, but I work with a lot of really great ones. And I often find that they're very hesitant to communicate anything about their work until after they're totally done. Their results are published, peer reviewed. They're worried about, what if their results turn out to be different than what I thought they would be? What if someone with more experience than me doesn't agree? What if they question my credibility? And I think those are all certainly valid points that we need to consider, but we also need to think about what's to be gained by sharing the journey of your study and the potential impact early on in the process. So science and innovation usually move pretty fast. I think we've seen that especially in the past year. But sometimes publications can be slow. We have to wait for them to be reviewed and preprints and all those kind of things. So if we wait until the article's published, we may have a missed opportunity. And I know that, scientists and researchers kind of cringe when I say these things, because you do want to have all those things to back up your science. So I'm not saying that we don't think that that's important, but I think that sometimes some of the more interesting parts of your research and the parts that can really inspire others, they might not even be included in a scholarly journal article. So creating impact from your research starts now. And I think you can start to tell its story now. Obviously, always make it very clear that you're in the process of this and it's not published or proven. But I think it tends to also be much easier to do this when you're in the height of your research and you're kind of in a groove and excited about it, rather than at the end of your project when you're ready to move on to the next exciting thing, like graduation. So I think there's a lot to be gained from sharing the anticipated impact of your research now. You can inspire other research. You might be able to gain funding for the next step and be ready to go on to the next step of the process right after your first publication. You might gather a following for the next stage in your career. It could shape what that next research is. You might be inspired, approached about other similar research you didn't know about. And it can provide an open invitation for discussion and productive feedback by getting insight from other researchers. But I think it can also keep you engaged and excited about the work you're doing. Sometimes we get in the humdrum of the everyday and we kind of forget the big picture about why we're doing what we're doing. So what does this impact look like that I'm talking about? It's not your scientific paper. While this milestone is huge and should be very much celebrated, it's just one outcome of your research. So your impact doesn't also have to do much to do with your methods. Instead, your impact is how others might use the knowledge that you've shared, the equation that you've validated, or the data that you've collected to better society by solving a problem or creating better quality of life. So a journal article is one way that we get there, but researchers tend to publish and move on, and I challenge you to think beyond that. For example, you're not just studying a new variety of corn that could be more drought tolerant, you're helping fight poverty in Kenya by finding a more resilient crop for farmers. So doesn't the latter make you a little bit more excited about the research and the work being done? So think about what the meaning and significance is of your work. So with these in mind, ideas in mind, we'll get to work on devising your own personal research statement. So we're going to explore what that means. We'll go through some examples, and then I'd like you to start thinking about your own impact and share it with Rachel and myself over email over the next week. So we have a little tiny bit of homework for you. So simply put, a research impact statement explains the so what of your research, its significance, what you hope it'll accomplish in the end. It's a brief description of the difference or potential difference your work makes in people's lives. So you might have explored this in an academic setting already, but here we're focusing a little bit more broadly. So you want it to be easily understood by non-researchers. And I really like this quote, not how many worms the bird feeds its young, but how well the fledgling flies. So the end goal is not how many worms the bird can feed its young. It's the impact of getting that fledgling to fly. So that's kind of what we're going for here. Your impact isn't what you did or how you did it, although sometimes those things are kind of fun to highlight as well and can be interesting to people. So it's not the activities or outcomes related to your research. So it's not things like methods, presenting at a conference, hosting a workshop, publishing an article. Those are all outcomes of your research, and they're definitely worthy goals, but again, they're not impacts. Your impact is the last piece of the puzzle, and it's also usually the most difficult thing to measure. We won't talk about that today. We're just going to focus on how to communicate what that impact is. So when you think about research more broadly, it's all about gaining knowledge to create some type of change. And while we may think that we're mostly just gathering data, we wouldn't gather this data if we didn't have a purpose for it. So when you're thinking about your impact, instead of thinking about you, think about public gain and consider what change or changes you're working towards. So here are some examples of changes. It could be a change in learning. So giving knowledge, attitude or skills, a change in action. So trying to change a behavior or a practice, which is sometimes very hard to do. a change in policy or decision making. So using science-based information and applying that to decision making, or it might be research results from policy engagement or condition. So you might be changing someone's condition. So this is the very much the bigger picture change. So let's use an example from the Institute's research to kind of go through these concepts. So I'm going to show you this short video so that you'll get to know this research a little bit, and hopefully this sound works. Okay. Boy, that was such soothing music. So this example is probably several types of change. I'd say first is learning. We're giving growers knowledge in the form of an app that measures plant health. Then we're causing a change in action. So we hope that they are adjusting some of their practices as a result of this knowledge. And then the change in condition would be that as a result of these changes, we hope that growers will be able to increase yields. You could even go a step further and say that increasing yields helps us use less resources and feed more people or create more energy. So the learning change is the short term. That's the knowledge that we're giving them. The action is the medium term, and then the condition is much further on in the process, and that's the long-term change. Does anyone have any questions on this before I keep going? You can unmute yourself and speak up if you need to, or raise your hand. Okay, I'll just keep going then.
Francis, I have a question.
Sure.
So on that video, it was clear for me, like the short-term the learning aspect that you showed the app, but then how can we be more specific and show like change on the medium and long-term horizon?
Like, you mean just in the video or when we're communicating?
Yeah.
So on my next slides, we're going to go through writing the impact statement. And it's funny, as I was doing this presentation, I was like, oh, I could have done a much better job at actually communicating that in this video. So hopefully the next slides will kind of explain that. But then if you have questions after that, then feel free to ask for sure. So. And Jody's asked if we can get a copy of the PowerPoint after the workshop. Definitely. I will send out a copy of this presentation and then also a copy of the PowerPoint as well. So no need to take notes. All right. Thanks for that question, Fernanda. Okay. So now that we've drilled down into the types of change, we're going to go through how to write an impact statement. So first, we're going to define the problem. And this is what made you start the research. What are you trying to solve? Did you notice that soil quality had decreased in a certain area and you want to find out why? Did you see potential for farmers in sub-Saharan Africa to increase yields? Found that droughts in India were causing low yields for growers? Questions like that. That's what we're trying to solve. Then we determine the new knowledge. So what knowledge have you gained or hope to gain if you're in the middle of your research that's significant. And this is what you may see in the results and discussion section of your journal article. And then we're going to find the intended action. So after you have this knowledge, what do you want people to do with it? What outcome do you want it to have? And how do you want people to use it in the industry or in policy making? So sometimes research is just done to educate policymakers on certain laws that they can make or things that they can implement to create change. And then finally, we're going to explain the impact. So how does this outcome create a public good or a bigger picture win? And what's the greater good that arises from all this? So we'll go through this example that I just showed, and hopefully this will answer Fernanda's question. So the title of that actual journal article, is Potential of Using Spectral Vegetation Indices for Green Corn Biomass Estimation based on their relationship with the photosynthetic vegetation subpixel fraction. I can barely get that out. But that doesn't tell us a lot about the change and the impact of this research. So we'll define the problem first. And that problem is that yield estimates are usually done by growers late in the season by sight or measured by weight at harvest. So this doesn't allow growers any time to make changes to increase these yields. It just tells them how much their yield is going to be. The new knowledge from this research is that we can use remote sensing to measure plant health through satellites early on in the season. The intended action that we want people to take is that we want growers to use this app that has this plant health data and make any necessary changes to produce more harvest and make the most of their resources. And then the bigger picture impact is that growers save time. If they're irrigating when they don't need to be, that's time and money and resources that they don't need to be using. So they can save time, money, and resources, but also produce higher yields. They'll probably use less water and other inputs, and the environment is improved and more food and energy is produced. So could be greater food and water security as well. So the impact statement we can draw from this is that researchers found a simple way to use satellites to measure plant health and estimate yield accurately and early. This helps growers make adjustments in hopes of producing more food and energy with less resources. And I think if we wanted to make it a little bit longer, we could add and kind of spell it out for people that this is helping with food and water security. So Fernanda, did that answer your question a little bit, or do you still have a question?
Yeah, no, it does. It's just because on the video I could see like the app and the intended action, but to me it was not that clear the long term. But now with the statement, yeah, it makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, I should probably use my own PowerPoint when making these things, but it's a journey, right? So we're going to go through another example, and this is from a DWFI supported student. So it's a student research, and then this is a video that we made maybe a year ago. So it's kind of the same thing where looking back on it, I would probably put this impact statement in the beginning, but at least this will give you an idea of the research that she's doing.
Based on our previous research, we found that the microalgae are very efficient in the removal of nutrients from meat processing wastewater. Firstly, we need to mix the concentrated sludge bacteria, which is this one, and the concentrated microalgae culture, which is this one, with this 2.5% sodium alginate solution. So sodium alginate is a natural polysaccharide. It's usually extracted from seaweed. There's still many challenges to put this method into large scale, and one of the most significant one is the complex wastewater environment, which will inhibit the microalgae growth. Mounting these beads in this mesh screen, so it won't flow around, and the light can be better penetrated, as well as the gas exchange and the nutrients diffusion will be much improved. So with this, we almost double the microalgae biomass growth. In the next step, we are going to do a fermentation of those obtained algal biomass and fermented them into some kind of products like the biopolymers, which can be further processed into bioplastic. If we have enough material for bioplastic, so that will help a lot for protect the environment.
Okay, so I think this research is a little bit more difficult to unpack because there's a lot of kind of background knowledge that you have to know about this. So we're going to do our best here to go through that exercise again. So the name of this journal article was Integration of Sodium Hypochlorite Pretreatment with Co-Immobilized Microalgae Bacteria Treatment of Meat Processing Wastewater. So the problem is that traditional wastewater treatment by meat processing plants can be expensive, but you can't leave it untreated because it harms water quality. So microalgae has shown promise to be an efficient, economic, and environmentally friendly way to treat wastewater, but that water from the meat processing plants is too harsh for it to grow in. The new knowledge is that if we pre-treat the water and put the microalgae in beads, it can be protected and it can grow in the wastewater to remove pollutants. Plus, throughout this process, we could also produce a useful byproduct in the form of bioplastics. Commercial meat processing plants can adopt new ways of treating wastewater using pretreatment and microalgae beads, and then they can reuse the treated wastewater in their facilities. The impact of all this research is that meat processing plants can save money, which we kind of know that things have to be reasonable for industries to actually use them. So if they're saving money, there's a benefit there for them to actually use this technology. A renewable form of treating wastewater is used. Less water is pulled from community resources. The environment is improved and communities continue to have safe water. So sometimes you might have to include the problem in your impact statement to provide some context. So for this impact statement, I've come up with microalgae has shown promise to be efficient, economic, and environmentally friendly in treating wastewater, but the water from meat processing plants is too harsh to sustain its growth. Researchers found that pre-treating the water and putting the microalgae in protective beads allows it to grow and remove pollutants. Meat processing plants can then reuse the water in their facilities, drawing less resources from the environment and ensuring continued safe drinking water. Plus, the process may also produce a useful byproduct in the form of bioplastics. So this is kind of a hard one to explain. There's a lot of little pieces and nuances to this puzzle, but in the end, I think we've pared it down to an impact that's relatively easy to understand. And as I mentioned, if I could go back and do this video again, I think I would include this impact statement early on, because I think I started off by talking a little bit too much about the process, but I think we need to ground people first and show them why we're doing this so that they, as they watch the video or as they read more about your research, they're kind of applying that to the impact statement they already have heard. So when you're coming up with these impact statements, I want you to think about if your grandma or someone who doesn't know anything about your research could understand what you're trying to say. Does it inspire someone? Does it excite someone? And these words can be lofty goals in research, but I challenge you to make this connection from your research to meaningful impact and significance, because I think it does matter what that impact is, because it's why we're doing what we're doing. On the previous example, I found myself wanting to use the term encapsulated instead of put it into beads, but I opted against it because I think it sounded a little bit too academic. So you should aim for a level of around 8th to 9th grade reading level for maximum impact. That means that 85% of the public will be able to understand your text if you're writing for this 8th grade level or lower. So for reference, the average newspaper is written at a 10th or 11th grade reading level. So this not only allows you to reach audience members who aren't well-versed in your field, but it's simple enough to get your message across quickly. So I don't want to have to stop and reread parts of the text in order to get it. I want to kind of get it right off the bat. And you also only have 7 seconds to grab someone's attention and get them to continue reading. So I think by keeping it simple and at that reading level, you'll hopefully keep them engaged and that they can understand it. They don't have to think too hard. So here are some tips to simplify your impact statement. The first one is to use smaller words. As I mentioned, put in instead of encapsulated. It makes our brains not have to stop and think too hard. Using simpler words, using active voice. So that's who is doing what. And that's also easier for our mind to process too. Using shorter sentences and also shorter paragraphs. Sometimes I see paragraphs that are pages long, and we kind of need a break to process that concept. So break your impact statement or whatever you're writing for consumption by general public into shorter paragraphs. Maybe have one concept per paragraph. So this is a fun tool. I use the term fun very loosely, that I found that it's a readability tool. So I created a short link for it. It's not actually associated with the university at all, but just because the link was so long. So I plugged my impact statement for the microalgae research into this tool, and I didn't do so well. I started out at a 15 grade level. So that's language that's typically understood by 20 to 21-year-olds. So I think we can do better with this. So after taking a quick glance, I've highlighted some of the words or phrases that I think we can simplify. So here are the ones that stand out to me right off the bat. And that first sentence, I think those words are so long that it kind of makes us take a mental break, and we want people to just keep going. So I toned it down to this. Microalgae can be an easy, cheap, and eco-friendly way to treat water, but it can't grow in the wastewater from meat processing plants. Researchers found that it can grow if put in protective beads and the water is pre-treated. The facilities can then reuse the water using less environmental resources and keeping drinking water clean. Plus, the process may also produce useful bioplastics. So maybe someone doesn't really understand what a byproduct is. So we can just simplify that. So after I ran this version through that tool, I was at an 11. So we're doing much better. A tool like this is also available in Microsoft Word, which you may already use. You kind of have to do some jimmy rigging to get it to work. So I've put how to do that here. Basically is found under your word count, but it adds this little readability section. So according to Microsoft Word, that is at a 10th grade level. So we're doing better. I'll stop and take any questions if anyone has any. Okay, we'll just keep going along.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I actually had a couple questions. One was real quick when you were going over, ways to improve an impact statement. Can you explain a little bit more what you meant by using an active voice? I'm not sure I quite got what you meant there.
Sure. So in writing, we have active and passive voice. So an active voice would be lawmakers passed a bill yada, yada, yada. Passive voice would be a bill was passed by lawmakers. So you want to start with the person or thing doing the action. It's just a lot more powerful, and it tends to make your sentences a lot shorter. So that's kind of what I mean by that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay, great.
And I did have a second question, but it might be a little too specific to my impact statement, so I can't ask it when I email what I'm trying to do with my impact statement. But I was wondering, what do you do if, you know, there's a problem that we're stating that we're trying to address? What if there's like two problems that are involved in our project? For example, my project, it definitely has things that it's addressing that are directly related to like research focus areas for the institute there, you know, like agriculture and water usage and productivity, that kind of thing. But it also has a lot of ties to climate change research. So it's kind of like it addresses two different problems. Is it best to like focus on one problem or try to tie them together? Again, I don't know if this is too specific to just my project, and I can discuss it over email, but
Yeah, I think if possible, try to address both of them, because I think that shows how powerful your research could be, that it is addressing both these problems, and especially if they're really intertwined. I'm hoping we have time at the end to kind of maybe go through some of your projects. So yours might be a good example to work through. Otherwise, I'm happy to meet after this and we can address it too. So,
okay.
But I would say if possible to try to hit on both those.
Okay.
I've got a quick question. Frances, what are your thoughts on using first person pronouns on this impact statement? Like we, is that correct, or we should avoid those?
I think it probably depends on your audience. I don't know that I have a strong preference. I think if you're writing and it's clear that you as a researcher are the person writing whatever it is you're writing, I think it's perfectly fine to use we. If it's just, you know, if it were a social media post that I was sending out through the Institute's Twitter account or something, I would probably say researchers, just because it's not really me, even though it might be DWFI researchers, it's not me and they don't know who's running the account. So I think it just depends on where the text is and who your audience is. All right, moving right along. I love this quote by Melissa Marshall, and she has a website, presentyourscience.com, and I think it's really helpful. She also has a really great TED Talk, Talk Nerdy to Me. So if you have a couple minutes, look that up. It's about science communication. And she says, science not communicated is science not done. So I think it really speaks to the importance of communicating these impact statements and being able to reach non-researchers and non-scientists. And I'm going to do my little diss on the deficit model of science communication here. So the deficit model is the assumption that public skepticism of science or technology is just simply from a lack of understanding, resulting from a lack of information. So the idea is that facts speak for themselves, information creates change, and we only need to broadcast complete, accurate information. AKA, if you research it, they will believe. Just give people more data. Surely they will then understand and change their behavior. I'm not a big believer in this. Instead, I think we need to show people the end goal, give them the impact in a way that they understand, not just in the form of facts or data, although I think it goes without saying that those things are important to back up your impact statement. But I think we need to kind of give people this impact on a silver platter instead of throwing all these numbers at them and all this data. People just don't digest things that way unless they're wired to be a researcher. So, and I don't think you have to dumb down your research. What's that?
I want to add a comment or question to the deficit model.
Sure.
Which I totally appreciate you saying that, because I am 100% in agreement. And I think that we're all often really guilty of it. And I think in agriculture, I mean, maybe it's just because that's the field that we're in, that I feel like it's somewhat pervasive. And so I just wonder if you have any feedback. Like, to me, I think it is about listening and communicating about values that people have, and not just assuming like, just because we do things this way, like people should like it. And I think that that's the mindset that a lot of people have. So I don't know. I feel like, to me, it's like about rooting in like values that we think our audience might share. If you have any other thoughts, because it's like, it's also about listening, but like when you're trying to put an elevator pitch together, it doesn't always mean you get to like learn about your audience. So I don't know, it's kind of more comment than question. So
yeah, no, I think that I 100% agree with that. And I think, maybe your impact statement would even change depending on who you're talking to and what's important to them. People in the US might have different values than people in sub-Saharan Africa. And
certainly.
And so you kind of have to speak to people where they are, and what's important to me might not be important to somebody else. So you don't always get that chance to know what's important to somebody else before you start talking about your research. But I think that's a really great point too, that not everyone is reached in the same way. Yeah, and this is just, you don't have to dumb down your research, but just it's all about making it accessible to people so that it can be used to its greatest ability. So I kind of have the next section laid out where we might work through some of your research, but I'll stop and see if there are any other questions before we do that.
So I have a question, and it's this. So when you request for annual report, is it the kind of thing you presented? Is that the kind of thing you want us to write? Because when I looked at the outline that we are supposed to follow for the annual report, it doesn't necessarily follow what you just described. So my question is, do you want us to follow what you just did in writing the annual report, or you want us to follow the annual report guidelines but inject few of this into it?
No, the annual report is old school academic.
Be super technical. And
so yeah, no, that's so that's where you are doing your what you've produced and what you've learned and relative to your area of expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay, so this is different from we shouldn't include any of this in the annual report, right?
No, you can if you want to talk about how you've reached a broader audience. But
okay.
This is relative to your, like, presentations to your peers, and and if you've presented to a conference or done a presentation or paper or something like that, definitely include that. But
okay.
but so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so two different things.
Yeah.
And so these impact statements that we're gathering from you, they solve several purposes. First, it's helpful for us to share these things with the board. And I think sharing them in the sense of 1 to 3 sentences is helpful. They don't really want to read a ton of stuff, but I think it's important that they know what you all are doing, and they like hearing about that. It also might help us highlight some of your work throughout the year. So just knowing the potential impact, but then it's also can be used by you. It's just kind of a way for me to get you to to do that. It can be used by you throughout the year, like I mentioned, of when you're applying for jobs or taking the next step in your career, talking with people about your research. So the impact statement serves multiple purposes, but is different than what Rachel is asking of you. So any other questions?
Got a question. So Francis, when you mentioned about the importance of having shorter sentences, honestly, that's something I struggle a lot, and I think that has to do with my native language, which is Portuguese. So for example, if we compare a scientific paper in English and Portuguese reading, usually we try to use more words to say the same thing, you know. So I wonder if you have suggestions or resources for international students, like to focus more on that, and how can we improve the writing?
I don't have any good resources for you beyond saying find people that you can send it to that can review it. Because I think also you're so close to your work that you want to spit out everything you know about your topic because you know so much. But sometimes having that fresh set of eyes can help people pull out what's really most important. I find that researchers always want to talk about their methods because that's kind of what it is exciting to them. And that's what they do every day is we do this and this and this, and then we found this, you know. But really for a non-scientist, what's important to them is how you're going to use it. So I'd find maybe your advisor, or I'm happy to look at any of your impact statements too, to kind of help pare them down. Or just even, you know, roommates and friends of, does this make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm doing? Because they might hear you talk about your research, but not really know what it is that you're doing. So I would just say use the resources and the networks that you have. I know you've been thinking about your own research throughout this time. So let's go through some of them. You don't have to have the answers to all of these questions, but let's just kind of workshop through someone's research project. So would anyone like to throw theirs out there? And to start with, you can just explain a little bit in your own words what it is that you're researching. I have the names of all your research, so I might just call someone out. Are you here, and would you like to use yours?
Okay, let me try. Okay, so my research topic is physiological and molecular characterization of nitrogen and water stress responses in maize. So on the question of, should I follow the four major questions in answering it?
Yeah, if you can, but we can also help you work through it too.
Okay, so the major influence of my research on, okay, I don't know where. Okay, so I'm going to use the four main points highlighted, you know, to explain it. So first of all, like I said, my research is on physiological and molecular characterization of nitrogen and water stress responses in maize. And what we basically did is to look at how plants respond to nitrogen under different water regimes. That is, when water is available and when water is not available, that is under drought stress condition. And we find out that depending on the dose or concentration of nitrogen, we find out that the plant responds differently to the concentration of nitrogen. And we also find out that higher concentrations, like 20 millimolar, can impede water uptake by the plant. And as a result, it affects the plant development. And we went ahead and we were able to discover that the reason why water might be available, but the plant might not be able to do well under high nitrogen concentration, it's because there are few genes that are able to perceive higher nitrogen concentration, and as a result, they are able to shut down the plant uptaking excess nitrogen to harm the plant. And if I may put it, these genes, there are 4 main genes we found. One is called NITE gene, the other are aquaporins, nitrogen transporters. Yeah, so in a simple sense, that's what we found. And we also looked at the plant responses to drought under different nitrogen conditions. And we were able to find that 14 genes primarily responds to the different nitrogen concentration under drought. And from that particular result, we understand that manipulations of those genes may impact producing plants that are tolerant to nitrogen, so that are tolerant to drought. So in a nutshell, the impact of the research is that it will be able to reduce the amount of nitrogen that is being applied on the field, and reducing that implies that there will be plant production is going to be enhanced, or it will boost crop production. It will also reduce the impact on the excess impact of nitrogen on the environment, such as pollution of underground water, pollution of underground water, and it's also going to reduce the cost of production. Then in the long term, the genes that we find to be regulating this nitrogen, the genes that we find to be regulating the water uptake and nitrogen in that sense could be used in producing nitrogen efficient plants in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what I can say.
Yeah, awesome. I think you did a really good job at the end of kind of bringing it around to what the impact is. So that's great. And sometimes you kind of have to go through the whole process to figure out what that impact is. So what I gathered from it, from what you were saying, was that the problem is that maybe some genes of maize are not very drought tolerant, and farmers need help knowing how much nitrogen to apply to them.
No, okay, let me put it in this way.
Okay.
What I was trying to say is it's long been known that plants respond differently to nitrogen concentrations.
Okay.
But it has been studied as the response of nitrogen to root has been studied extensively, but the response to nitrogen to shoot has not been investigated thoroughly. It still remains elusive. So we wanted to know how the plant should respond to nitrogen. And
okay.
Our investigation showed that higher concentration of nitrogen, such as 20 millimolar, impede plants development. And the reason is that when you apply higher concentration of nitrogen, even when water is available, the plant is unable to uptake water. And we know that water contains all the nutrients. All nutrients most of the nutrients are dissolved in the soil water. So, but if the concentration of nitrogen is higher in that soil water, the plant is unable to absorb excess water or absorb more water that will support its development. So, okay. Yeah, so the nutshell of the experiment is that we were able to observe that it's not only drought that impede plants development, but also excess nitrogen could impede development of plants.
Okay.
And we also did drought research too. My research is indeed very complex, but yeah. I will just say one part of it. And so I only focus on the nitrogen for now. And okay. So the nutshell of the experiment is that it will help farmers to apply adequate amount of nitrogen fertilizer to the field to support plant growth. And that is going to reduce the cost of production. Secondly, it will also minimize the impact of nitrogen pollution, such as underground water that has environmental and health risks. Okay, so I think I'll end it. I won't talk about the drought because it makes it too complex.
Yeah. So I think that's good. So the broader impact is a lot of different things, and it's that you can reduce the amount of nitrogen applied, which means you're using less inputs. It's cheaper for the farmer. You increase production, which means more food or energy. You're putting less nitrogen into the environment, so you're keeping groundwater safe. So all of those things, I think, are definitely the broader impact. So awesome. So I think we're at 11 o'clock, so we're at time. But thank you for joining us today, and I hope it was valuable to you. Thanks, everyone.